Hi, I'm Margaret, and I'm 70 years old. If you're thinking to yourself, ADHD at 70? How is that even possible? You're not alone. That was my first reaction too. But after years of feeling like something just wasn't right, I finally got the diagnosis that answered so many questions. ADHD. And it's not just a kid's problem. It's something that affects people of all ages, including those of us who are a little further along in life. I know it might sound strange, but stay with me. This isn't just a story about an older woman and a late-in-life diagnosis. This is a story about understanding yourself in a whole new way, learning that it's never too late to change how you think, and how the diagnosis of ADHD can actually be a relief. So, if you're curious about how ADHD might look in older adults, or if you or someone you love has struggled with similar issues, this video is for you. Trust me, it could change your perspective on what aging and ADHD really mean. Before I dive in, do me a favor. If you find this video helpful or interesting, please give it a like, comment below if you've had a similar experience, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories, tips, and advice on navigating life as we get older. Okay, let's get into it. It all started a few years ago. I was sitting in my living room one evening, just thinking about all the little things that seemed to go wrong in my daily life. Forgetting where I put my keys, getting distracted while reading a book, struggling to finish household chores. It was like my brain was constantly jumping from one thing to another, and I just couldn't keep up. But I always chalked it up to getting older. I figured it was just a part of aging, you know? Everyone says your memory fades as you get older, right? But then it started to get worse. I found myself missing appointments, losing track of time, and feeling overwhelmed by things that should have been simple. I'd be talking to my friends, and my mind would wander off. I'd forget what I was saying halfway through a sentence. My family would ask me to do something, and I'd forget until they gently reminded me. I was getting frustrated with myself, and I'm not the only one. This is something that many older adults struggle with, and most of us don't even realize. It might be ADHD. I thought these were just part of getting older. It wasn't until I started reading about ADHD in older adults, particularly women, that I started to wonder if maybe there was more going on. As I did more research, I realized that ADHD in older adults doesn't always look the way we think. It does. We often think of ADHD as something that makes kids hyperactive, but in older adults, it can be much more subtle. It can look like difficulty concentrating, losing track of time, being easily overwhelmed, or struggling to keep things organized, exactly what I was experiencing. After months of feeling frustrated and confused, I finally decided to visit my doctor. When I sat down with him, I shared everything: the forgetfulness, the distraction, the constant sense that I wasn't quite in sync with the world around me. My doctor was kind, patient, and asked a lot of questions. After our discussion, he suggested we look into the possibility of ADHD. I was surprised, but honestly, the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The first thing I did was look up ADHD in older adults. I learned that many women, especially those like me who grew up in a time when ADHD was largely considered a children's disorder, don't get diagnosed until later in life. I found that many older women have spent their whole lives feeling like something was off, only to discover much later that it was ADHD. What ADHD looks like in older adults. So what does ADHD look like when you're older? For me, it wasn't about running around or being unable to sit still. It was more about being constantly distracted and overwhelmed by even the simplest tasks. I could never seem to focus on one thing at a time. I'd start organizing a drawer, but before I finished, I'd find myself in the kitchen starting a new project. I'd try to read a book, but my mind would wander to something else every few minutes. It wasn't until I started reading more about ADHD in older adults that I realized my experiences weren't just normal aging issues, they were classic signs of ADHD. In older adults, ADHD can present itself in ways that are easy to overlook. For example, forgetfulness might not be linked to age-related cognitive decline, but instead to ADHD. Losing track of time, procrastinating, or having trouble staying organized are all symptoms. And for women, ADHD can often go undiagnosed for years because the symptoms are less obvious than the hyperactive behaviors typically associated with ADHD in children. Women, especially those who grew up in the 50s and 60s, were often expected to be quiet, organized, and composed. If you didn't fit that mold, you were simply seen as absent-minded or lazy. The relief of a diagnosis. I have to admit, when I first got the diagnosis, I felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved to finally have an explanation for the way I'd been feeling for so long. ADHD wasn't something I made up, it was something real. I wasn't lazy or forgetful because I was getting older. My brain just worked differently, but on the other hand, I felt a little bitter. Why didn't anyone catch this sooner? Why had I spent my whole life thinking I was just an inefficient, forgetful person? I mean, I was trying to do my best. I was managing my life the best I could, even if my brain wasn't exactly cooperating. The diagnosis felt like a double-edged sword. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the diagnosis wasn't a burden. It was a gift. I had the opportunity to start fresh, to learn about myself and my brain in ways I never had before. And that's the real gift ADHD has given me. Coping strategies now, I'm not here to tell you that ADHD goes away with age, because it doesn't. But what I can tell you is that there are ways to cope. ADHD doesn't have to control your life. With the right tools, routines, and a little bit of patience, you can still live a fulfilling, productive life, even with ADHD. For me, one of the most helpful things has been setting up systems. I've always struggled with keeping things organized. But now, I've learned how to use tools that help me stay on track. I use a big wall calendar to keep track of appointments and important dates. I make lists, lots of lists. And I've started using timers to break up tasks into smaller, manageable chunks. The key for me has been realizing that I can't do everything all at once. I break my day down into sections, and I focus on one task at a time. If I feel my mind starting to wander, I take a short break, but I set a timer to make sure I don't get lost in that break. And I'm kind to myself when I need to ask for help. I've learned that it's okay to admit that I can't always do everything on my own. One thing I didn't realize before my diagnosis was how much my environment affects my focus. I've had to make my home more ADHD-friendly. I've created little zones in each room where I can focus on a single task without being distracted by piles of stuff. Decluttering my space has been one of the most effective strategies for managing my ADHD symptoms. So, to anyone watching this who might be in the same boat, whether you're older or younger, if you've been struggling with symptoms like mine, I encourage you to talk to a doctor. ADHD is real, and it's not something you should feel ashamed of. There's help out there, there's support, and you don't have to face it alone. For me, getting the diagnosis was a turning point. It was a chance to understand myself better, to make changes that work for me, and to live my life with ADHD in a way that feels empowering. I'm 70 years old, and I'm learning to live with my ADHD in ways I never thought possible. If you've enjoyed this video or feel like you relate to my story, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below, share your experiences, and let's start a conversation. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more about my journey with ADHD and how I'm living my best life at 70. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's never too late to discover something new about yourself.